apologize that I don't speak Spanish, so bear with me here. We're going to work through this slowly. We're talking about a novel technology here, virtual fencing. And so I get a lot of questions on this, even from producers that I have actually applying the technologies. And so I want to really just start from the ground up. And so we're going to kind of just work through this real slowly, and hopefully we'll have some time here at the end that you can ask me as many questions as you like, because I'm more than happy to answer anything. So anyhow, title here is Virtual Fencing, a tool for the conservation of grassland diversity, and that's going to be in the context of both vegetation as well as animals, really across the spectrum. And so, what is virtual fencing? Okay, this is the first question I get. What is it? I've heard this term. I've seen it somewhere. Some of you may have not have heard of it. It's not something that is extremely popular at this point in time, but it's catching on. But it's actually extremely basic. It's really, we're training livestock to respond to audible cues, so any sounds, and then electrical stimuli.
Inicia lamentándose que no habla español, pero va a tratar de hacer lo más posible para poder ser entendible. Va a estar hablando sobre un tema relativamente novedoso que es el cercado virtual. ¿En qué consiste este cercado virtual? Es en entrenar al ganado a atender cierto tipo de sonidos o de estímulos eléctricos para saber que ahí no debe de acercarse.
Okay, so down here just gives you kind of an idea. We have some audio cues, we have pulses, but really it's this imaginary line. We really think of it as a full-fledged fence in a lot of cases, but it's very simple. We don't have anything out there. There's nothing placed. We don't have visual cues. This is solely training an animal to respond to audio. And what happens is we train these animals over time. They will get used to an electrical stimuli to where they say, hey, I don't like this. And so there's an audio cue, so beep, 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 shock. And so eventually what happens is we see electrical cues drop drastically, but actually audio cues increase a lot. And really that's a good sign, because what's showing is they're actually utilizing those areas up to the point that they'll be shocked.
Entonces, esto debe entenderse que es un cerco que no se ve y que basa su uso en un estímulo o en un entrenamiento del ganado, que empieza a escuchar algo, después también hay un shock o una descarga eléctrica, y que después queda entrenado nada más a escuchar y entonces ya responde sin necesidad de la descarga eléctrica.
So these systems are collar-based. So as you can see, you got these collars, they're chains, all right? That is one of the primary things, that it's a chain. And people say, why do we have chains? That's actually where we apply the electric stimulus, is through the chain. There are some that are more of a nylon, and that would be much more like a dog collar type scenario, and those actually have prongs. But this is what we see here most prominently. This one is actually from a company called Vince. This one comes from a company called Gallagher, and it's very hard to see, but right here, this one actually has a solar panel on it, so it actually recharges over time, whereas this one is just an individual battery, and so that one will play out in a pretty quick pace.
Presenta dos tipos de descarga, vamos a decir, una que es con cadena, que es la parte de la fotografía superior, y que además la descarga proviene o se alimenta a través de un panel solar, mientras que la de abajo utiliza baterías. Pero lo que quiere traer a colación es de que sí se tiene que utilizar una serie de instrumentos o de collares o de herramientas para poder hacer uso de este cerco.
Although we think it's a new concept, it's not. And so this has actually been around for close to 40 years. It's just now that we've actually had the technology to apply it on a large scale. And so actually there was a lot of work done in the 70s and 80s that was really utilizing radio frequencies to actually apply stimuli, but they were actually placed in a box, right here. And so the animal had a tag on them. As they approached, they would receive the signal. Not a very viable thing whenever we start thinking from a production aspect. You're going to have to do a lot on a very, very regular basis. But it's not new. We just now have technology to support it.
Bien, esa tecnología se basa en conocimientos de hace más de 40 años, pero que está empezando a ser de uso común a partir de tener una tecnología que ya reduce los costos y amplía la posibilidad de uso.
Ultimately, what this is allowing us to do is we can control animal movement across landscapes. All right, that's the most basic concept. And so, in this instance, we have this is roughly 20,000 acres. So these are each in that 5,000 range. But we have 3 herds, and one of them we have collared, but they're just free range. They get to choose. It's, whereas others, we have these on more of a rotational set. And so as you can see, we're able to kind of force these animals into specific areas. This is just a very basic set, but we're actually able to kind of what Carlos was talking on overuse of areas. We get into some of these where we're able to keep them off. We're not going to back graze and things of that nature. There's other scenarios where we want to remove them from areas entirely. So in some parts of Texas, we have a lot of oak woodlands, things that, especially during calving times, are very, very difficult to manage. And so we actually work to keep these animals out of these areas, allow them free access to everything else. And so there's a few different approaches.
El uso del cercado responde a diferentes necesidades, desde una de tratar de mover a los ganados a través de las diferentes áreas, o bien evitar que puedan entrar en algunas. Por ejemplo, es cuando están en la época de parición, evitar que las vacas se muevan hacia las áreas más boscosas, donde sería muy difícil poder encontrarlas y poder ayudar en el caso de que se requiera ayuda hacia las crías.
A few other aspects that actually have caused for popularity on this in more arid environments is actually just to monitor and find the animals. So whenever it comes to processing time, if we're going to be weaning calves, if we're going to be preg checking, trying to find animals on massive, expansive rangelands is very difficult and actually is extremely expensive. And so being able to just find animals is one part of it that is a huge pro. Another is actually we can assess the pasture use. So even though we are trying to improve utilization, if we just assume that by fencing them that we're going to get full use of these areas, that's kind of that's a false thought. So here you can see this is the heat maps showing grazing distributions across the landscape. Even though that we have these fenced off, we still see that we're having selective use in specific areas. And so even though we feel like, okay, we are attempting to improve grazing distribution, we may not actually be doing so.
Otros usos de este tipo de tecnologías es de que cuando estamos hablando de extensiones muy grandes, a veces nos parece o nos podría parecer muy elemental, pero es muy costoso al andar encontrando los animales, ¿sí? Que si de repente una cría requiere más ayuda, que si de repente una vaca tiene algún tipo de problema, pues estarla buscando individualmente a veces es un poco difícil y costoso. También es el hecho de mejorar la distribución. Si bien existen otras herramientas, pues esta tecnología puede ayudar a contribuir a un uso homogéneo a través de todo el área.
So that's an idea of what it does, but what actually do these systems entail? This is the next question that I generally get, and so it's actually fairly simple. We have the collars. We've already seen those pictures. Generally, these are only going on cows or yearlings. Usually, we're talking somewhere in the 200 kilo realm is about the minimum we can put on. From there, we generally don't put a lot of these on bulls as well. If you have them individually, it can be some issues there. If we have them grouped up, not a big deal. But, so you have the collar base, and then we have actually what we call our base station. And it's all right here. So they have a collar on. We have our base station. These are a few pictures of some examples there. That base station is really acting as an intermediate to our cloud services, and this is really the brain of the system. And so we have this three-way interaction between the cloud, that base station, and the caller. And so I'll go ahead and see.
Bien, este sistema tiene tres componentes básicos. El collar, debido al peso y al movimiento de los animales, se recomienda que este collar solo sea utilizada en las vacas o en animales ya de más de un año y que pesen cuando menos alrededor de unos 200 kilos. También existe el siguiente componente, que es la base. Esta base sirve como intermediario de lo que va a ser la señal, y una base que le llama de nube, que sería algo así como una especie de origen central que va a ir hacia la base y de la base hacia el collar.
And so that is the most common setup in which we have this base station. However, we do have a lot of cellular, and where we actually are able to remove the base station, and so we have a direct link to the cloud via cellular. And so that's another technology there. If you want to talk, I don't know if you want to state that.
Sí, bueno, se me han dejado las fotos de acá abajo, presentan algunos ejemplos de bases, pero que también ellos han estado trabajando con esta tecnología de tal forma que no requieren de la base, sino directamente de lo que él llama como la nube, directamente hacia el collar, y así reduce los costos.
All of this ultimately comes down to the manager itself and utilizing a web or cell-based application to really go through and draw our borders and define those grazing periods. Okay, so we have all these other things that are working in the background. We're really not concerned about them. We're solely focused on our management goals. And so this is just giving an idea of how we can do a training, and where we start with a very large area and we start to just squeeze them in over time. And so this is ultimately, we have these put on specific timings, so every day, and I know it's very difficult to see, but every day we have a fence turning off and another one turning on. And that allows us, during the training process, to automate this. We're watching them, but we aren't technically out there on a daily basis.
Bien, enfatizamos o enfatiza el aspecto de que esto es un entrenamiento. Entonces los animales deben estar entrenados para poder responder a este cerco virtual. Y entonces lo que van haciendo es, van entrenándolos reduciendo las áreas, empiezan con un área muy amplia y después van reduciendo las áreas de este cercado virtual para que los animales se vayan acostumbrando y vayan adaptándose a este tipo de cercado.
Another major question that comes to us is we don't have cellular or we have a lot of terrain. Is this a viable option here? And it definitely is. So the reason for that is the data is not having to be updated on a minute-by-minute basis. Instead, it's literally held on the collar. So we can pre-program up to so many moves, generally 6 to 7 moves. And with that, we do not have to do anything in terms of having them contact with the server. And so the data doesn't have to be moved on a regular basis. And instead, we just need to have it communicate periodically. And that could be through the use of strategic placement of water, supplementation, areas where we have good service. So here it just kind of indicates that the green is really good service, the blue is marginal, and the red we don't have service. However, we're still able to graze all of this just by focusing on having animals receive that information while within the green or the blue.
Bien, este cerco virtual, de la forma que trabaja, pues es dependiente también de las superficies. Y de repente una superficie muy grande en donde no pueda tenerse la señal, etcétera, pueden existir. Sin embargo, no requieren un continuo, vamos a decir, comunicación hacia la base. Con tal de que uno o dos animales puedan estar recibiendo la señal, es más que suficiente. Y que también en forma intermitente. De tal forma que de esto se soluciona cuando estamos hablando de superficies muy grandes, que es uno de los aspectos en la aplicación de esta tecnología que ellos han estado trabajando.
So the other question a lot of times is how much area can this cover? And now, from a cell-based setup, if we're using cellular data, it's really limitless. It's really where you have cell service. And really, it doesn't have to be very good at all. If you can get a text message setting your phone there, you will be able to utilize the callers. Whereas if you're using the LoRa-based, we need to understand that there's a few more limitations. They're usually going to be more useful in some rugged types, but it's ultimately going to be close to 10,000 acres that we can cover on a regular basis. That's with a lot of confidence, a high level of confidence. With us, we see anything from this property here, we can encompass close to 11,000 acres. It has a lot of terrain, a lot of up and down, whereas this is actually around Lubbock, and although I have 15,000 acres circled, we honestly can cover close to 30,000 acres there, just because there's really nothing there. And so, I'll let you go ahead.
Bien, como eso trabaja con una señal, pues dice que uno de los indicadores es el uso del teléfono celular, que les puede estar indicando si hay o no hay señal y qué buena es la distribución de la misma. Sin embargo, no requiere una señal, por así decirlo, al 100% efectivo, y que la superficie mínima, o vamos a decir estándar, que puede cubrir son alrededor de las 5.000 hectáreas o los 10.000 acres aproximadamente. Sin embargo, todo va a depender de la topografía del terreno, y entonces él indica que en algunas propiedades, en las zonas relativamente más planas, pueden llegar hasta alrededor de las 15.000 acres, que vendría siendo así como 7.000 hectáreas.
So, with this, the really important factors are going to be terrain, elevation, tree cover, and then building interference. The last one, a lot of people don't think about. We think, okay, replace a tower, we shouldn't have any issues. We've actually run into a lot of issues with buildings, more so than trees, in a lot of instances. And so we just need to understand that we need to be very strategic about where we place these to ensure that we can work well with the situation that we're given.
Bueno, algunos eventos dentro de la superficie que pueden estar interfiriendo con la señal, pues es la topografía del terreno, la elevación en donde está la base y también la cobertura vegetal, o la cobertura con árboles. Sin embargo, él dice que uno de los eventos que más afecta la posibilidad de transmitir la comunicación es los edificios o las construcciones, que parece que podría considerarse como algo sencillo, como algo poco común. Sin embargo, sí es algo que debe estarse considerando al plantear en dónde poner su base para esa comunicación.
So ultimately the question comes about, can this actually improve grazing management? And I think the resounding answer is yes. Really, because of where we are today, specifically in the States, we're seeing costs be exorbitant, extremely high. And so generally our barriers to actually improving grazing management come down to infrastructure, labor, and time. And so the use of this can actually help to mitigate that. Just for example, what we see from an infrastructure basis is that a mile of fence is costing us roughly $15,000. A mile of just an inch-and-a-half water line is roughly $12,000. Going ahead and just drilling a new well roughly at 150-foot depth, is 10,000. It literally costs us less to drill than it does for us to run a water line. And ultimately, in our region, water is a major limiting factor to the grazing distribution. And so, ultimately, this can be very beneficial and pencil out.
Bueno, y este cercado virtual realmente tiene algún impacto importante, esto debemos estarnos siempre preguntando. Y entonces, bueno, él pone desde el punto de vista de tratar de mejorar la distribución de los animales en el área de pastoreo, podríamos pensar en algún tipo de infraestructura. Él pone algunos ejemplos, dice que más o menos cuesta $15,000 hacer una milla de cerco, alrededor de $12,000 poner una milla de línea de agua o conducir el agua, y alrededor de $10,000 poder llevar a cabo una perforación de algún tipo de pozo para de unos 150 pies de profundidad, que vendrían siendo aproximadamente como unos 70 metros. ¿Sí? De tal forma que los costos para poder mejorar la producción de los animales y a otras alternativas es relativamente muy elevado. Y ese es uno de los principales, vamos a decir, beneficios de acercarse a este cercado virtual.
So ultimately, the use of these systems can really pencil out due to the time and cost associated with that infrastructure development and movement. So particularly now, when we're looking at more holistic sets, so ultra-high stock density, trying to do amp grazing, some various aspects to where time and labor are really going to add up, not even taking into account travel, so just mileage, as well as depreciation that's associated with those things. And so all of these, whenever we actually come down to the economic analysis, typically it's cheaper to utilize the virtual fencing than it is to utilize human capital in many instances.
Y bueno, ahondando en este sentido de la viabilidad económica de esta tecnología del cercado virtual, pues nos va a reducir tiempo de trabajo, nos va a reducir costos de mantenimiento y nos va a reducir también pues, los costos de instalación. Entonces, todos estos aspectos hacen que realmente valga la pena trabajar en este aspecto del cercado virtual.
So using this, what the potential benefits we see is utilization of the resources we already have. So forage, many times, particularly in our region, forage resources are not lacking. It's generally having utilization of those forage resources away from things such as water. Being able to keep animals from overutilizing an area. So forage, water, time end up being our major benefits. This is just giving you an idea, kind of time lapse on grazing over a couple of days in this property. And so, as you can see here, really, the distribution is relatively poor. But it's really focused on water, right? And so here what we really need to do is alter where these boundaries are. We need to increase stock density, and we can actually be a lot more strategic about how the forage and water are utilized.
En la gráfica, en la fotografía, estos pequeños puntos que se ven es el seguimiento que se le ha dado al comportamiento en el pastoreo dentro de esta área. Y como puedo verse, realmente todos los puntos están acumulados o se están manteniendo en un solo lugar dentro de todo el área. Y lo que quiere decir es de que este cercado virtual puede ayudar a mejorar la eficiencia de uso de los recursos que ya se tienen, como por ejemplo el forraje, el agua y aún el tiempo en que los animales le dedican a andar explorando el área.
So now here's just kind of an overview of that. So that was all those movements, and this is the cumulative assessment. So yes, we're focusing, a lot of grazing ends up being focused around these water points. However, if we actually hone in on where we had most of the grazing occur, for us in our region, those are our low-lying areas, typically going to be associated with Playa Lakes, huge conservation effort. This becomes something that both from a political as well as a production aspect, we're going to have overuse of some very fragile ground. And so this is where we can utilize it to keep them out.
El CV rojo son los puntos críticos de sobrepastoreo que generalmente están asociados a un lugar relativamente plano, entonces se forman lo que nosotros podríamos llamarle lagunas, o sea, son superficies de agua relativamente de poca profundidad, y entonces ahí los animales se están concentrando, pero que también estas áreas son relativamente frágiles. Sí, también quiero traer a colación estos puntos que se ven aquí, son los puntos de aguaje. Entonces, otra vez hay una fuerte concentración en estas áreas donde se está dando el agua. De tal forma que pues, se requiere una herramienta de mejorar la distribución de los animales para hacer un mejor uso de los recursos.
And so this is just giving another visual on basically being able to use minimal water. So here we have on one property water up here on the north side. Well, instead of providing access to the entire property, we're able to split that. Same thing here, we're able to focus and utilize this single water point, but not allow them access to other parts of the property. Ultimately, for us, that's a major benefit.
Bien, también en el respecto es evitar que los animales vayan a áreas en las que por alguna razón no quieren que estén, y estos son los ejemplos que está poniendo en lo que se ve aquí en esta fotografía, tiene un punto de agua y ese es el que está permitiéndose a la luna para poder llegar. Mientras que las áreas que no se requieren o que no pueden ser que los animales estén en presencia, pues también las puedo ir aislando de este uso.
The other area here that's a potential benefit from a conservation basis, as well as just a grazing efficiency, is we can reduce the back grazing. So we can graze an area, we can move that fence, keep them from coming back to it. For us, at least in parts of the state, shade loading. We'll get to areas where animals really just congregate around shade. And so keeping them away from a lot of these areas, this is just a repeat picture, but you can see a little better that we have very heavy forest here, and we keep them out, focusing more to our grazing pastures.
También en el sentido de no permitir que los animales vayan a áreas en donde yo no quiero que estén, como puede ser concentrarse en las áreas boscosas para buscar algún tipo de sombra, pero también regresar a áreas que ya han sido pastoreadas y entonces para evitar que el animal pueda estar afectando el rebrote o el nuevo crecimiento.
Another aspect here is, particularly now, riparian areas are a major area we're focused on from a conservation basis. So keeping animals out here, we can come through without applying a physical fence to keep animals off this. If you're in an area that has a lot of terrain, we can apply this on a broad array of various stream banks to keep them off of it, to help with some of the nutrient load aspects, as well whenever we start thinking about the fire aspect. If we're trying to protect those areas, particularly if it was from a wildfire basis, not so much from prescribed, we generally need to keep animals off that, right? And so that's a nice way that we can still utilize areas, yet keep animals off of some of these sensitive areas.
Uno de los ejemplos de lo que podría ser interesante retirar los animales de áreas frágiles. En una primera fotografía, la superior, presenta humedales que requieren ser conservados, que requieren que los animales no estén estropeando o destruyendo este tipo de humedales. Y la fotografía de abajo son áreas que ya sea por manejo o ya sea por accidente, fueron quemadas y entonces pues hay que proteger el rebrote, el nuevo crecimiento para que los efectos positivos se puedan dar. Entonces, pues sería muy costoso tratar de hacerlo con cercas físicas, mientras que el cercado virtual nos puede ayudar en proteger estas áreas, no importa el tamaño que puedan presentar ni el lugar en donde se encuentren dentro de la propiedad.
The other one, particularly whenever we start talking about the biodiversity aspect, we have a lot of fragmentation that's associated with physical fences. So trying to remove those. And so here we can really, we can utilize virtual fencing to specifically manage for a certain habitat, depending on where you are. So this can come into a grazing mosaic. It can be focused on seasonal grazing. We also have just the removal of physical boundaries. So a major issue in our region is with pronghorn and physical fences, and so animals becoming trapped. And then lastly, hunting is a major enterprise in Texas, and unfortunately, many people don't feel they can coalesce, and so keeping animals away from specific areas that we're hunting in, from a manager perspective, is actually a great tool for them.
Otro ejemplo está asociado al manejo de fauna silvestre, en donde de repente las cercas físicas obstruyen o rompen los corredores del movimiento de los animales, como en este ejemplo que presenta de Rendo, en el cual pues, las cercas físicas pueden estar obstruyendo, llegándolos a detener en sus movimientos migratorios. Pero también, para el caso de Texas, el uso de la cacería de fauna silvestre es un ingreso importante. Sin embargo, si los animales entran a las áreas en donde están ellos buscando mantener o tener esta fauna silvestre, pues existe una interacción negativa entre la ganadería y la fauna silvestre. Recordando que la fauna silvestre es un ingreso muy importante para algunos de estos ranchos, fundamentalmente en el estado de Texas.
So we've discussed benefits and how it can be extremely beneficial. It can be cost effective, given scenario. However, there are a lot of pitfalls, and this is still a new technology. So these are decreasing, but they're still there. Ultimately, it's electronic. All right, and anything that's electronic, particularly when we have them out in the elements, we can have issues. And so that is something that we have faced. And so from a technical and environmental issue basis, you know, we have solely batteries that run out. We have animals that during rainfall events may actually be placing the collar into water, submerging it. Well, that's not very good whenever it's an electrical component. And so those are a couple.
Bien, si bien se ha hablado de los beneficios, no quiere decir que esta tecnología esté totalmente libre de algunos detalles operativos, como por ejemplo, lo que es algo electrónico, pues sí, definitivamente hay zonas muertas o zonas en donde la conductividad de esta señal pues, se ve definitivamente alterado. Y también, bueno, pues puede acabarse la fuente de energía, las baterías, todas las vías del medio donde se ve el animal, pues presenta una situación de que de repente se acumula agua, el animal mete el collar dentro del agua y pues, debemos recordar que esto es eléctrico, electrónico y bueno, va a estar afectando su funcionamiento. Entonces sí hay problemas, es lo que quiere decir, que hay que resolver según los lugares en los que se encuentren.
Another one, although I've already mentioned, we don't have to cover an entire area. If you have dead zones, in which this is really where we have a lot of topography and we're trying to focus management into those specific areas. So this is just showing that this is the location, we have the red, so there's no coverage. And we start looking at it, it follows these low-lying areas. And so generally, we're not going to have the ability to manage those areas if they're going to be focused in them. Now, if they're outside of them, it's still possible. But if it is only in that red, it just won't work.
Y bueno, dado que existen estas zonas muertas, pues va a haber lugares en los cuales el cerco virtual no va a poder dar las funciones que se esperan de él. El ejemplo que está poniendo es un punto rojo, acá, y que cuando ellos analizan la topografía del terreno, pues está en una hondonada. Y si de repente nosotros queremos en esa hondonada tener algún tipo de aislamiento o de mejoramiento de nuestros animales, pues el cerco virtual no va a estar funcionando.
The other is that livestock require training. You've dealt with livestock. Livestock can be ornery. There's certain instances this works very well, and this just is a quick overview of how we generally try to train animals. We put an electrical stimulus, they're exposed to that. We then add in an audio stimulus here in the white, and then we actually squeeze it down. So that's the progression, and quick and simple.
Bien, y como enfatiza, este cerco va a funcionar a través de un entrenamiento. Y entonces pone las fases de entrenamiento. Primero es el estímulo eléctrico, luego el auditivo, y luego empiezan con los dos tratando de reducir las áreas. Y bueno, pues esto es entrenamiento. ¿Sí? ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Bueno, pues que tenemos que tener la paciencia y la planificación para el manejo de este tipo de cerco.
So, yes, it is very simple when we talk about animals who've likely been exposed to electric fencing or what I would consider general kind of ranch-raised cows, stuff that are used to humans. It's really pretty simple. So this is just showing the training map, and then if I remove that, you can see these really hard lines. And so that demonstrates it's a very good training. The animals respect the fence.
Bien, si el entrenamiento es exitoso, pues en donde empieza a restringirse el área y ya después cuando está nada más el puro cerco virtual, pues respetan esas áreas, no mueven hasta las áreas en un pronto entrenados para no entrar.
Now, on the flip side, we have a bunch of cell barn heifers, and you dealt with those. That's very fun. So post-training, we had no respect for the fence. And this can be indicated by all these white dots. Each of those are an individual GPS point. So we actually had to come back, train those animals again. So we doubled the training period, and this is now what they did. Ultimately, they train. It just takes a lot more time.
Con animales no acostumbrados a cercos eléctricos ni nada, como este ejemplo, estos puntos blancos representan los animales que no respetaron este cerco virtual, pero que tuvieron que ser sujetos a entrenamiento, y una vez entrenados, pues prácticamente todos en todo momento están dentro de las áreas que el cerco virtual está restringiendo su movimiento, su presencia.
So with this, it really comes down to, depending on your production setting, culling may actually be necessary, because you can have some that really are going to result in animals not respecting that fence, just like with electric fencing or any fencing in general. But apart from that, we have the producers that require training, and that is another area.
Bien, los animales pueden ser entrenados, pero no nada más los animales, sino también los productores deben de pasar una fase de entrenamiento. Pero también trae a colación la aclaración de que no todos los cercos, ni los físicos, son 100% funcionales. Siempre va a haber animales que no respetan ningún tipo de cerco, pero enfatiza el hecho de que este entrenamiento no nada más es de los animales, también debe ser hacia los productores.
To manage this is where, particularly as we start looking at age of producer and comfort using technology, that we come to a head, because we have to utilize this online application, and this is giving it an idea. This is what I actually used the other day. It can be very difficult to use. It can be confusing, and so for producers, it's not easy. It is a learning process, and it does take some time. Then they'll utilize it and realize that looking at it on the screen, it looks like all these animals are in a tight bunch. And so in this scenario, we actually had them in a pen right here, but we had GPS signal just wasn't great right there. And so as you zoom in, it actually appears as if animals are all over the place. We know they're in a pen, However, whenever we look at this, it can be deceiving, and so frustrations can occur.
Bien, el primer punto en este entrenamiento hacia los productores está de que mucho de este manejo es en línea y pues no todos están pues facilitados o familiarizados con el aspecto de manejar aparatos en línea o hacia vías remotas. También otro detalle es de que no siempre son del todo exactos. Él pone un ejemplo de que los animales estaban encerrados en corrales y sin embargo el GPS les enseñaba que pues, andaban dispersos por todos lados y no era cierto. Ellos sabían que estaban los animales encerrados, entonces sí hay algún tipo de fallas en las herramientas que se utilizan.
Ultimately, we have to monitor these guys regularly, not every day, but we need to until we're comfortable with it. But it's going to be frustrating. We've had scenarios that we don't know how it even happened occur, and you just get very angry and upset. But frustration will be there. It's a learning experience, and often if we can get through the first month, we're good. But it's getting people through that first month, training the animals, training themselves, for us to be able to apply the systems.
Bien, se trabaja con animales vivos, con organismos vivos, y siempre pasan cosas que uno pues, no planea, como el ejemplo de la fotografía que aquí presenta, que, bueno, pues aquí está el collar, cómo es que llegó ahí, cómo es que se lo quitó el animal, pues son cosas que generan algún tipo de frustración. Sin embargo, pues, repito, ante esta frustración hay que estar trabajando con el productor, sí, entender que no todo va a solucionarse, va a funcionar como uno planea. Y además, bueno, pues, como todo, siempre va a requerir que estemos atentos a cómo está funcionando.
So just here's a brief list of some potential applications and where a lot of people, through discussions, we feel that these are highly applicable, but really more efficient use of grazing land. We've already discussed the water aspect. We've already discussed forage utilization, but areas that aren't currently being used. So public grazing allotments, in terms of being able to actually wholly use those, this can be a great tool. Private leases and CRP where places where we would have to come in and apply an infrastructure. We can remove that because we can just move the animals with the system to that location. Another is going to be a crop livestock integration. Same thing as with a private lease in terms of we have a lot of agronomic crops in our area. So a lot of cotton residue, we have a lot of sorghum residue. They're not very often grazed. We miss a massive opportunity to utilize those feedstocks. And so being able to apply something such as virtual fencing can, one, support rest of rangelands at a critical point in time, that early, late fall, while also being able to utilize a feedstock that actually is going to be highly beneficial to both the livestock as well as the grain producer.
El uso de este cercado virtual también puede tener como beneficios que se incorporen al uso de la ganadería áreas que por su razón de uso pues no tienen un cercado físico, como por ejemplo las áreas de cultivo, en donde hay una serie de residuos del cultivo que pueden ser aprovechados por el animal, siempre y cuando podamos contener los animales dentro de esa área. En este caso muy particular presenta el ejemplo del cultivo del algodón, que es un cultivo muy común en el área de estas grandes provincias. También pues hay un programa que se llama de conservación, si no mal recuerdo, el CRP, ¿sí? Por sus siglas en inglés, en donde pues, se retiran ciertas áreas del uso, ya sea agrícola o ganadero, ¿sí? Y que se le paga a la persona por este retiro voluntario. Sin embargo, pues, hay una biomasa que eventualmente después de terminar o cumplir con este programa, pues podrían ser utilizados, de tal forma que el cerco virtual, por esta gran movilidad que presenta, podría hacer o ayudar o colaborar en el proceso de hacer uso de áreas ganaderas que no son intencionalmente ganaderas, como es el área de cultivos.
So we've already discussed the grazing exclusion, so breeding grounds, burned areas, riparian areas, targeted grazing, and there's so many different ways that we can apply targeted grazing, from a wildlife habitat basis, an invasive species basis. I really like the fact for more of the wildfire mitigation. It is a tool that we're seeing within both public and private lands, and this is from a recent paper utilizing this for fire breaks. And we actually see that it works very well in that sense.
Bien, otros usos dentro de este cerco virtual es lo que él llama pastoreo con objetivo o con tipos blancos, que quiere decir retirar animales de algunas áreas o poner animales dentro de ciertas áreas para que puedan hacer uso de ellos. Y algo también importante es el uso de este cerco virtual para generar lo que nosotros llamamos calles rompefuegos, disculpe, que quiere decir reducir la biomasa para evitar fuegos o quemas no prescritas o fuegos ¿cómo puedo? Accidentales, perdón.
So there's really a lot of opportunities here. Some that still are in the works are going to be things related to animal health and nutrition. So within these, we have triaxial pedometers, right? So we were able to actually assess animal health. We can do some things with heat detection. The fact that it's actually records, right? We have this as a record, so when we get into carbon programs, particularly if they require a specific grazing plan, you can actually prove what you've done. And so really, we've only touched the surface at this point in time, but there's a lot of opportunity.
Bien, este cerco virtual presenta otra serie de oportunidades o otra serie de beneficios que están por explorarse, como salud animal, como detección de calores, como poder evidenciar prácticas que estén encaminadas a poder calificar para apoyos en el manejo de la retención o de el aislamiento de carbono.
So that's kind of an overview of what we have. One of the big ones becomes down to availability. Now, up until this year, we had very, very limited availability. We had one company that we, at least in the States, could utilize. Now, we actually have a pretty good list of them. So we have Vince, Corral, No Fence, Gallagher, that are all available. And they each have the pros and cons. But with them, we have Vince, who is the LoRa-based up here. Corral, which is a small cell-based company. We have No Fence. It's a cell-based. This is actually the only one that we have a product for small ruminants. All the rest are solely for cattle. So this is the only one at this point in time that is built for small ruminants. And then we have Gallagher, which is probably it's the newest one on the market for us, but it also has the most possibilities because you can decide based on your situation what system you want, whether that's cellular or the LoRa-based setup.
Bien, también hay que tratar en este punto de cercos virtuales, bueno, pues cuál es la disponibilidad comercial que pueda tenerse. Y entonces presenta, sí, 4 compañías que a nivel mundial están trabajando. Fundamentalmente la primera es la que más ha estado distribuida en Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, trae a colación de que solamente esta que está aquí, Cercas, algo así podríamos traducirlo, que trabaja con equipos también para pequeños rumiantes, fundamentalmente ovejas. Sin embargo, repito, pues, la disponibilidad comercial todavía es algo limitada. Falta mucho en cuanto a pues qué tan bien trabaja o qué tan mal no trabaja en lugares específicos, pero que siempre vale la pena tratarlas.
So ultimately, what does the future hold? We're going to have a lot more commercial availability. These are becoming more and more popular. Things are becoming cheaper, So we're actually seeing that the application of these is improving. Research has been done over the past 5 years, and we've really come a long ways. And so research is improving the tool application, finding feasible ways. We have greater technology that is opening up literally every day. Students who are working in these various areas are improving our technology. And then ultimately, as we just saw, we went from 1 company to 4. So market competition is really going to start influencing the cost. That's been our big barrier to entry, is the cost associated with these systems. We're now at a point that it actually pencils out, and so we're going to see this continue forward.
Bien, ¿y qué es lo que nos espera para hacer el futuro en cuanto a lo que es el cerco virtual? Pues él habla sobre que pues, la investigación puede estar hacia cómo mejorar el uso de esta herramienta. También que pues, la tecnología electrónica cada vez avanza de forma diaria, cambia de forma diaria, pero también que esto generará una competencia comercial para poder incrementar el número de posibilidades o de disponibilidad comercial de este tipo de productos.
What it's going to ultimately allow us to do is do more with less infrastructure, labor force, and time. All right, as we look at, and this is just U.S. statistics, but our labor force has decreased drastically. In our area, this is something that can pencil due to that. It allows us to take advantage of opportunities and apply strategic management. We can simultaneously improve the economical and ecological sustainability of our systems. And ultimately, it gets the next generation interested. It's technology. It's something that it's not go out and build fence. Instead, we're seeing where a lot of families, generational ranches that are having the youngest generation actually manage all of these type of systems. And one, they have the knowledge, but they also have the interest. And so they're only going to help us build this further, but also helps bring people back to the ranch.
¿Qué más dentro del futuro? Pues que va a reducir las necesidades de mano de obra, de tiempo dedicado fundamentalmente a los aspectos de infraestructura. También pues dará oportunidades para un manejo más puntual, más estratégico sobre algunas áreas. Y también ayudará a la sustentabilidad tanto económica como ambiental y además pues podrá ser un factor para hacer que las nuevas generaciones se interesen en la producción o en la ganadería a través de facilitar o de mejorar las posibilidades de invertir sus tiempos en este aspecto de ganadería.
We don't only have this as a technology. So Humberto will be talking about this tomorrow. We work with some other technologies as well, but integrating this with other precision technologies. We're becoming smart farms is really the direction we're going. We just don't have the human capital in many ways, as well as we're having political pressures on us to improve efficiency overall. And so whenever we get to it, I'm not going to say that we're going to have autonomous farms, but from a ranching perspective, it's going to be relatively autonomous. And so we can utilize imagery to assist with those grazing management decisions, basically to have trigger points for us to either move animals in or out of a location, applying automated scales and supplementation, as well as having emissions monitoring. So this is a potential market that is coming on board, and that really comes from a emissions reduction side of it. And so having all of these things together, we can improve overall productive aspects, as well as having animal health monitoring that's on board this thing.